This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of Anatolian Dispatch. Today we have with us again Colonel Chris Kilford, retired from the Canadian Defense Forces. He is also known as Dr. Kilford with a PhD in history. And he is, Chris, let me get this straight. You're the head of the Canadian International Council in Victoria, but you're also on the national board of the CIC, right?
Yes, it's a major think tank in Canada, headquartered in Toronto. But unlike a lot of think tanks, we have branches in 18 cities across the country. And just here in Victoria, I have about 420 members that belong to our branch.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the American audience, it's comparable to the World Affairs Councils, but my experience is that it's more think tank than tourist agency. And a lot of people don't know this, but I mean, it's unfair for me to really compare it to the World Affairs Council, because the World Affairs Councils in the U.S., depending which city they're in and who's in charge of them, they can be kind of a way to make people feel good about themselves in retirement as they go off on these quote unquote study tours. But my impression recently you had a really very thoughtful presentation it was centered in Toronto, but you weren't there, right? This was the 2-day defense and security conference that you had.
Well, it could be foreign policy by Canadians.
Right.
Like many of our events, for example, in a few weeks, I'll be talking with our ambassador in Brazil about Canadian and Brazil relations, and of course the challenges also that Brazil is facing politically. And yesterday we held an event where we launched a new book called Canada in the World 2020, which has a lot of different authors, including me, and I have a chapter on Canada's engagement in the Middle East, our strategic engagement. So we do. Our main aim is to sort of inform the public and our members, of course, about ongoing issues, so that we just have that better informed public. Right. Because quite often, and I'm sure, I don't think this is always the case in the U.S. because of the U.S.'s involvement in the world, but here foreign policy is often left off the agenda when we talk about anything. We talk about anything else but foreign policy. So we tried to raise the focus.
The sad reality for me as a former U.S. diplomat is that nobody really cares much about U.S. foreign policy once you get outside of a few population centers. When you're outside of the Washington, D.C., New York City area, foreign policy per se loses its interest unless it becomes a hot topic. So suddenly Israel and Palestinians becomes a hot topic because they're firing rockets at each other. So that becomes important. It's a little different on the West Coast, though. The West Coast is fascinating because they have an abiding interest, because the West Coast, more than the East Coast, has, I mean, the people out there really seem to understand how important international trade is. So the focus they seem to have out there in the different kind of international affairs groupings they have seems to be focused on economic and trade issues rather than kind of political and national security issues. Yeah. East Coast of the United States is that. But let's go on. So, I mentioned national security, and I want to return to the book at the end before we go. So one of the things that we talked about before was the, I guess, embargo, you would call it, of WestCan's brain for the Bayraktar unmanned aerial vehicle. Where does that stand right now with Turkey and arms sales by Canada to Turkey in general?
Well, Canada still has an arms embargo on Turkey. It began in 2019 after some of the Turkish operations that had happened in northern Syria. In April of 2020, we changed the ban, made it a little bit lighter so that we could continue providing those Westcam targeting pods for the Bayraktar TB2 drones. That was all well and good. That was fine. But then, of course, we had the fighting break out in Nagorno-Karabakh, and it became apparent that there were Bayraktar drones there, that they had the Westcam cameras on them. And we have a fairly influential Armenian diaspora here who raised this issue. Also, Project Plowshares, another group here, said, we shouldn't be selling these pods. And so Canada extended the ban to include the pods. And it did make the Turkish government very angry with Canada. We were not the only country to pull back on some of the bits and pieces that go into the Bayraktar drones. But certainly that targeting pod is the brain, if you like. Now, right. I think Turkey was already onto this issue, and Aselsan has found or developed a replacement. It's I can't sort of say, is it any better or is it any worse? I've looked at the specs. It looks like it's a little bit heavier. It probably required some adjustments to be made to the platform. Perhaps a slightly larger engine was required. But needless to say, we read just the other day that Poland is buying Bayraktar drones. They're probably going to come with the Turkish developed version of the Westcam camera. And Ukraine is in the market and has some already and probably will have more. And so what it really means, of course, is that L3 Harris, the Westcam manufacturer here, they've lost out on some potentially lucrative contracts. Right. I suspect the Bayraktar drone will be purchased by many more countries going forward. And it's just going to be one of those things that countries decide, like ours, to have arms embargoes and for good reasons. But there's always sort of a price to pay, if you like, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of concerns in the United States in certain quarters when effectively Turkey was pushed out of the F-35 program, due to getting the S-400s from Russia.
Yeah,
I think Lockheed Martin has found substitute purchasers. Maybe L3 Harris, Westcam will be able to do the same. But yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting decision to be made about how you and to whom you sell your defense articles.
Yeah.
In the United States, I worked in the office in the State Department for a couple of years that had to work on processing arms sales. And it was interesting, in the US, approval for arms sales or transfers have to go through both the Department of Defense and the Department of State. And then they have to be approved by both the Senate and House committees for defense and for foreign relations. So it's a pretty incredibly complicated thing. And then, of course, what happens is you have different interests coming into it. But yeah, I mean, but I can imagine, you mentioned the Armenian lobby and then Plowshares. Plowshares is also active in the United States, by the way, although I don't know if they're quite as active as they seem to be in Canada. But of course, we have the same issue with different ethnic groups in America who, are now U.S. citizens or have been for generations, but they still have some ties and interest. So, the chairman actually of our Senate Foreign Relations Committee is Bob Menendez. He had been sponsoring the Senate resolution for declaration that the events of 1915 were a genocide, and he's been doing that for about 18 years. So I can understand the Armenian lobby.
Ed, can I just say here briefly, like weapons sales for us, it's very straightforward here. It's our equivalent of your Secretary of State, the Minister of
Right.
Foreign Affairs. He or she, it's a he right now, has the ultimate authority. They decide. It is the minister. There's no one else to really speak with unless it
Right.
becomes really contentious. And then, of course, the minister would speak to the prime minister and others. But the ultimate sign off is pretty straightforward. Yeah, it's much simpler here, I think.
I can tell you a joke that your then prime minister in 2000, when you were having an election about a month after our very contentious 2000 election, in which there was all this stuff about ballots had not been properly marked and all that. It was pretty hilarious because he stood at one of your beautiful transparent ballot boxes. He took his ballot, which he had just filled out, folded it twice, and dropped it through the slot. And as he did, and of course everybody's taking cameras because he's the prime minister and he's voted, when he drops it through the slot, he says, "Simpler than in the US," which seems to carry over into many fields of endeavor. You mentioned the Bayraktars being sold to Poland. It's already been sold to Ukraine. So in some ways that helps to move out of Turkey for a moment, or look at Turkey's military activities. We talk a little bit about Eastern Mediterranean. What do you think is going to go on with the whole dispute over hydrocarbon access and exploitation there?
Yeah, I mean, like, I wish I knew.
Yeah.
Which is not the greatest response in the world. It's a little quieter than it was, compared to even a few months ago. I really don't know how it's going to play out, because we're seeing all sorts of shifting alliances or agreements or reaching out, et cetera, whether it's Turkey and Egypt, for example. What will be the relationship going forward between Turkey and Greece? There's and the future of Libya. So there are too many moving parts that say, right, oh, well, it's going to be this way.
Right.
I think, I spoke yesterday at another event, and it was about the Middle East. And I did mention the fact that Canadian peacekeepers had deployed to Cyprus in 1964. And I added, that's 57 years ago. I wanted to, tell the audience that this was just a simple reminder of how long issues play out in the region. And so we don't have any resolution on the Cyprus issue. I don't foresee one really in our lifetimes. Maybe that sounds bizarre, but that just seems to be the way it is. And so when I look at what's happening in the Mediterranean, too many shifting parts. I can't give a definitive answer. It's going to be this way or that way.
Yeah. One of those shifting parts actually is Israel and the Palestinian Authority, because the exploitation of some of the Eastern Mediterranean hydrocarbons, there's like I guess a consortium that involves Egypt, Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Cyprus. And yet we just had this outbreak of, again, as you mentioned, a long-term issue. But let's talk a little bit about the way President Erdogan and Turkey, by extension, reacted to the latest violence between Israelis and Palestinians.
I actually thought it was expected. It always sounds awful, and it prompted me to go back, just out of interest's sake, to look at that exchange that took place in Davos in 2009, when then Prime Minister Erdogan was sitting as part of a panel, and Shimon Peres was there, and Prime Minister Erdogan wanted to speak, and he was allowed to speak for a little bit, but then he was being cut off, and then it became very ugly, and words were exchanged. And I then fast forward to 2021, and there's been much more in between, and we see similar exchanges where Turkey comes out heavily on the side of the Palestinians, of course, and Hamas, and so on. And all through this period, behind the scenes, of course, the economic piece continues, and it's been growing, and Israeli tourists will go to Turkey. There are probably other exchanges that take place, like, for example, on the intelligence side. We see, even in Azerbaijan, one of the most interesting photographs that I saw come out of Azerbaijan were three young men walking down a street with their backs to you, but one had a Turkish flag on his back, one had an Azeri flag, and the other had an Israeli flag. And that was pointing to the fact that the Azeris were receiving, and have received from Israel military training and equipment and so forth.
Right.
And now, of course, Turkey was involved. So, again, this whole business in Gaza and Palestine, which I also spoke about yesterday, it goes on and on and on with no resolution in sight. We'll probably be talking about this in 5 years, in 10 years. There'll be another exchange, another blow up, and you've got 2 million people crowded into a very small space in the case of Gaza, with really not a lot of hope for the future. And that's the sad part of all this. But I think also it plays to, and it's everybody says this, of course, but there's truth to it. It plays to President Erdogan's base and his supporters in the Arab region as well, when he says these things, because their governments, of course, are a little bit more muted at times. There have been some breakthroughs on the relations side through the Abrahams Accord, but the street is not enamored with all of that. And so Erdogan appears to be someone that's, speaking truth to power. So, but this will all die down for going forward until it flares up again. So it's ugly, it's horrible, it's similar to the exchanges we've seen between Turkey and some European countries, Austria, the Netherlands, a few years ago. So I think, for the Turkey watchers, we expect to see this sort of thing.
Right.
You almost become immune to it, although it's never pleasant to see.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm sure you noticed that the White House response to what Erdogan said, not referring directly to Israel, but commenting on the U.S. continuing supply military aid to Israel, drew a very sharp response. A rebuke would be the only right way to put it, and an accusation, effectively, that Erdogan was anti-Semitic, that came out of the State Department. The thing that triggered that, I think, my interpretation, was because there are enough people familiar with the way Erdogan talks to not have been surprised that he was maybe going over the top. But the fact that he referred to President Biden as having blood on his hands probably really set them off in the White House. And I'm just glad that when the comment, the rebuke that came out of the state, that it came out of the State Department and not from the White House. I mean, you know how these things work. If it comes from the press spokesman of your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's one thing. If it comes out of the press spokesman for your head of government, it's a different thing. But yeah, that was a very
And President Erdogan also again accused the United States of being behind the 2016 attempted coup.
Was it Erdogan, or was it just Soylu? Who, that takes us to really the big thing we want to talk about, and that's you mentioned Erdogan playing to his base. Well, it was Minister Soylu who I think said, almost categorically, the United States is attempting another coup, which
he said, quote, it was all on U.S. orders. We all know that.
Yeah,
that's what Soylu said.
Yeah, and of course he was able to say something like that because he knew that his boss was not going to reprimand him for saying saying that.
Mhm.
But his boss does seem to be pretty quiet on this, on these revelations coming out from Sedat Peker. So you want to, and that of course ties into Erdogan's base and how much support does he have? The economy's not doing real well. COVID response is iffy.
It's like going back to 1996 and the Sisterlook scandal, where we had the car crash and all sorts of interesting characters were found in the car. Of course, 3 of them died.
Right.
But there was much more to that story, which we don't have time to go into. But it pointed to the deep state ties between the police, the mafia, criminal groups, etc. And then you fast forward to today, and I've spent a lot of time actually on Sedat Peker's website, where he has all of his videos and lots of other information that he provides. It's normal, if you like, in some respects. If you look through the 90s and up to today, it's and all of the stuff that has gone on between the Gulen movement, especially after sort of 2013 forward, and then of course before that we had these various trials, Ergonokon and so forth, and all pointing to the deep state collusion, not sure who's doing what to whom, those weapons deliveries by MIT down into Syria. All sorts of shady business going on that people want to keep undercover and don't like to have it exposed. And now here, of course, we have the latest installment, which people point to being very much like a syndicated show that's raising up all of this dirty laundry. And I think, I was thinking about this in the context of Canada and even the United States. Can you imagine if you had a mafia boss in the United States sitting in Dubai, revealing everything, throwing insults, accusing people of things, how that would really play out, and here we have it in Turkey, and it appears it's getting. I mean, he's touching on a lot of very sensitive things, and of course, the worst thing you get all of those people that are being pointed to firing back, and so rather than taking the high ground and just saying, if you look at what's happening in the Turkish media or the media around Turkey, because of the restrictions that are in Turkey, it's getting quite ugly. All sorts of things about Erdogan and this other woman, and pointing to that relationship, and so the sort of gloves are off, so to speak, I think from what I look at from some of the Turkish friends that I have and what I've also read in the media, that it's okay. Yes, on the one hand, it's great fun, and these videos have had tens of millions of people watching them. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people in Turkey that are just really don't know what to do right now, where to turn. They look at the state of politics in their country, hitting yet another low point. But then, of course, they've got economic issues also, and having got through COVID, but not in the best of ways, and all of this is coming together, and all heading to 2023, when there'll be the 100th anniversary of the Republic plus elections, and where will this all end up? But I think that from what I read from my friends is that the feeling, the morale in the country, already low, is just become a little bit lower. Perhaps the base is happy. I don't know. If I was in the base looking at all of this, I would begin to question how much can I actually stomach. Now, as always in Turkey, it's knowing where the alternatives are. And if you look at the alternatives, they're not that great, because many of the people that are running these parties or forming new parties have also come through the 90s and all of this as well. So the alternatives are not that much better. And so this is the great problem that the average Turkish voter has. Where do they actually turn to for policies that are going to be different from what the AK party has?
Right.
If a new party comes into power, will the Turkish government at this point then say, okay, hands off of Libya, let's get out of Iraq, let's have an agreement with the PKK, that sort of thing? Are we going to see that? No, of course not. So I guess whoever it is would need to run on the economy and promising to clean up all of the corruption, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen that before. That's how come the ACT Party got into power, right? They said
That's
things
right.
were going to be different.
Right.
And
I mean, what does Ak mean?
white,
It can mean white, but it has also the metaphorical meaning of pure,
pure,
clean.
yeah,
And
sure.
yeah,
And
I mean,
you go back. Sorry, Ed. Sorry, but you you go back to that election in 2002 and how that parliament was turned on its head, and there were great there was great progress made in the early 2000s, and it's all gone.
Yeah.
It's all gone.
No, I mean, our mutual friend Senator Chapter had, wrote a trilogy that basically was following Erdogan, but the first one was very optimistic and hopeful. It's about the rise of Turkey as this great modern democratic nation that was, in a sense, the first modern major Muslim democracy that unlike other countries with a majority Muslim population that are supposed to be democracies, this was really working. And it was when people were very hopeful that Turkey was on the cusp of getting an invitation to the EU, and the AK Party had come in on a campaigning to fight corruption and to and let's be honest, the CHP was sclerotic. But yeah, what's going to happen now? And as you say, who's the alternative? I mean, because it really comes down to who could the opposition put forward to run against Erdogan, who would really have a reasonable chance of winning. And I can't imagine that Erdogan's base would abandon him for someone like, I don't know, Çavuşoğlu or Babacan or any of the others, Davutoglu. I mean, these people, as you said, they're from the AK Party. They are probably, if not as much tainted, they are in some ways tainted by 20 years of power. I mean, there is something to be said for a regular change in authority when you have the same people running things for 20 years in a row. Things usually go off the rails.
Yeah, I picked up a comment Ed Davutoglu said on the 22nd of May in Cumhuriyet. He said, "The president has destroyed the core values we believe in. The whole system is decaying. Turkey is a cartel state, a narco state, an autocracy, an autocracy." So that was what Davutoglu had to say.
Right.
Yeah, and I see, another, I think Ince's coming with a new party, and all of it splits the opposition.
Right.
And of course we cannot underestimate or play down the role that the MHP plays in Turkey at this point.
Right.
With supporting the AK Party.
Yeah. No, I think what we're, this is all building towards 2023, and I take the point about the low morale. I mean, my friends in Turkey, what I hear from them is it's a real sense of frustration and almost hopelessness. I mean, what can we do to make things better? What can we do to have a better response to COVID? What can we do to improve the economy? What can we do to clean up? And, just as you said, yeah, it's fascinating to go and watch all the stuff that Sedat Peker is saying. And it's kind of, there's some titillation going on, political titillation about, all these things being revealed and all that. But at the same time, it's, these revelations are not improving the economy. They're not improving the response to the COVID pandemic. They're not sorting out relationships with other countries or with the Kurdish minority in the country, which, is really turning into a serious festering wound. In many ways, it's much worse now than it was in, say, 2010, 2011, when there were some indications that some sort of accommodation of the Kurds living in southeast Turkey would be made, and yet now it's just hammer away, and it seems that they have returned to that they really do believe that a purely military solution is in the cards, and I just can't believe that that's going to happen.
I think the other important thing too is that, if Turkey did have a free and open media that was looking into all of these allegations and publishing stories and so forth, that this would be a government that really would be in trouble. I doubt. Well, I suspect they would have had to have. Well, they would have been moved out of power well before even now.
Right.
But most certainly with this latest set of
well, yeah, I mean, this
scandals.
this is we're coming up on pretty soon the 5-year anniversary of the failed coup attempt, and one of the legacies of that was that the government was able to impose states of emergency, and then with that leverage, basically take control of all of the media outlets. I mean, effectively, there is not really any independent media in Turkey, not traditional media, not broadcast on television, not newspapers being published and widely read. It's all happening in different ways on the internet, people using virtual private networks in order to be able to access news sites and information. And I think that in part is why this, everybody is going onto YouTube to see what Sedat Peker has to say, because whether he's lying, whether he's embellishing, whether he's telling the truth, it's not being filtered by government censors.
Yeah. And I think also here that little saying that we all know well, where there's smoke, there's likely fire. This is perfect for this situation. But
I was fascinated by you saying that you see the media in Turkey. Do you see them using this as an opening to maybe have a more independent voice? They're reporting on this.
Yeah, look, I mean, as soon as you don't toe the line, you do get in trouble. They're Sozcu, of course, and others are out there, but they're also very careful. Nobody wants to get these massive fines or be taken off the air, and you see this constantly happening. Look, I mean, everybody will always look for a weakness, and once you see a little break in the wall, it could be that some people will start pouring through. But then on the other hand, we've seen this before, right, where the government looks like it's on shaky ground and somehow recovers. So I'm not hopeful that the world is really going to change. I think the only place that Turks really have a chance to show their feelings at the moment is the ballot box, which still remains largely it's not interfered with. It's
right.
Free, but
and we have the lesson of the we actually have the lesson of the municipal elections, where clearly Erdogan was trying to undo the outcome of Istanbul, and in fact, what happened was the electorate, as well as the election workers, refused to participate in an effort to undo the will of the people.
And polling data is, doesn't read well if you're in the government. And I think that's also the other issue, because you're not able to really read the pulse of the country per se. When you've got it in a sort of semi-lockdown, you can't really read the pulse, and then you get that massive shock like we did see in that runoff in Istanbul. Oh my gosh, imagine if you were in AK Party headquarters that night. So everything fell apart. It had already fallen apart with all of the other wins that the opposition had, but then to have this rebuke in Istanbul, And this is the problem, and this is why I think we will have to watch that election in 2023 or whenever it does happen, very, very, very closely. And I would be worried if I was in the ACT party. I would be seriously worried about the current situation.
Well, yeah, and I, I think you're absolutely right. They should be worried, but go back to the point you also made. Who is the person?
The opposition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody that the Turkish voters will move. They may move to a number of different parties.
Right.
And if you can put the MHP and the ACT party together in parliament, then you can probably put anybody else together in a combination without the ACT party, of course, even with the MHP. I mean, never say never in Turkish politics.
Oh, no.
So any number of people could come together. We've seen this in the coalition governments of the past. Of course, it's been a disaster in the past.
Yeah.
The ACT party having this big majority in 2002, and then keeping it up until 2015, was quite a turning point in Turkish politics. And so if we do go into a coalition situation, perhaps, as we always see, perhaps the media will be free for a period of time, but then you'll see more jockeying going on, and it just doesn't bode well anyway for the future. There's so many competing issues simply because of things like, as you've mentioned, dealing with the Kurds and the PKK writ large. How do you see a way forward on that? Is it another 50 years of warfare? That holds the country back. So,
I mean, it's a substantial section of the country and
growing.
A substantial amount of the population. I mean, there is no way that Turkey is going to really progress economically as it should progress until it resolves the situation in Southeast Turkey. And that means the situation of the Kurds.
Yeah, for sure. I think also, though, the counter is that it's remarkable how well Turkey actually has done economically. When you do compare it to the 2001 financial collapse, and then everything that has been achieved. I mean, it's actually a marvelous story, despite the fact that they've had this ongoing insurgency and all of the neighborhood falling apart around them. Look, they come into power in late 2002, and then you have 2003, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, right? And then it just keeps going. And even before that, they had the Iran-Iraq war from 80 to 88. And all through that particular period, they've had to contend with this terrible neighborhood, even before that. Yet they have done remarkably well. And this is the whole thing. If they could resolve some of these internal situations, then you would actually be looking at a Turkey that is really a significant player on the international scene for the better. Better.
Oh no, this is the thing. I mean, given how well they have done, if they as many of us thought was going to happen, if back in 2013 they really had progressed in resolving the situation between the Kurds and everybody else in the country, and finding some way to, if at the very least, marginalize the PKK, where it would be now is difficult to imagine, because it would have excelled. Instead of making slow progress, it would have just, I think, grown by leaps and bounds. But they still would have had the problem of Syria and all that. Okay, so tell me the name of the book again. This is Canada in the World.
It's Canada Among Nations 2020, and it's a Palgrave Macmillan publication. Dr. David Carment is the editor, and there are some 15 chapters in the book talking about Canada's role in the world and where we can make a difference going forward. I think most Canadians usually we play down our role in the world. Actually have done great things in the world over many decades, but we often sort of play down our role, especially because we are next to the United States. But I always say to people, look, Canada actually has the 10th largest economy in the world. We are the 13th highest defense spender. Of course, it pales in comparison to the United States, but nevertheless, we are the 13th highest defense spender in the world. And we're a major energy supplier. We bring in 300,000, even up to 400,000 immigrants soon, every year to Canada. So it's a very dynamic country, not without its issues, of course, but a very dynamic country. And at the moment, though, I think, like many, we're struggling to find our role on the world stage. We were keen to have a seat on the Security Council, but we were not elected recently to have a seat in sort of 2021 going forward. So this book sort of tries to take another look at where we are and where we should be going.
And you have a chapter on
the Middle
Canada
East
in the Middle East
and North Africa. Yes, 6,000 words to cover all of that. It was a daunting challenge.
Well, that's okay. I'm reading Tom Holland's Dominion. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book. Came out a few years ago, and basically what he does is he traces the influence in Western civilization of Christianity. So it's kind of a thick book, but still he's trying to cover 2,000 years.
Right.
You need multi-volumes. So yeah, 6,000 words to cover Canada in the Middle East and North Africa is I'm looking forward to. So this is available now. I can go to Amazon and find it, or?
Yes, but it's one of these academic books that's horribly expensive. So maybe wait for a year or two, or check out the library.
Well, yeah, okay. There's a couple of good academic libraries nearby that I'm sure will get it, including my alma mater. But I don't know if we can go into them yet because of COVID restrictions. So as soon as that's lifted.
Right.
Okay. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure. Thanks again for your time. I'm hoping that we could actually turn this into like a monthly thing, if that interests you. So roll it around in your head, think about it. And we very definitely want to talk, I want to get you on the schedule for July, because my guess is that you might be reprising your role with CNN and others and Canadian Broadcasting Corporation about the coup. I remember on the day of the coup, you were on television trying to explain to people why this had happened.
Yeah, for almost 9 hours that day.
Yeah,
it was endless. And we, as you know, we here in Victoria, virtually, we just hosted Jeremy Seal, who had written about the 1960 coup and what happened to Adnan Menderes. And I guess a lot of my PhD work was focused on coups. Oh, and you've got the book, terrific.
Yep. Which, by the way, wasn't easy to get. It can be gotten via Amazon in the U.S., but it doesn't have a U.S. publisher, so hard to get. You can purchase it, but it's coming from a British publishing house.
Yes, it's taking weeks to actually get it, but it's well worth the wait. I thoroughly enjoyed
absolutely.
it.
I know, I've been through it. It's great.
Yeah. So and I've written on the coup. I wrote a publication. It's available on the net. It's called A Night That Shook the Nation.
Right.
And I'm sure the Turkish embassy here in Canada and elsewhere will hold events to note the anniversary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we still have, as we close out here, of course, followers of Fethullah Gulen being arrested almost every day. You don't always see it because we only get the big numbers reported. They'll say 100 here, 200 here, but it's happening every day. And again, that speaks to the morale in the country as well.
Well, I'm thinking about the fact that we just saw the Belarusian authorities use a a ploy to get an international aircraft, commercial airliner brought, down into Minsk to take off a dissident. I think of the number of Gulenists in different countries who have been, what's the term we use? Illegally renditioned or, back from those countries.
Yeah.
Yes. But that doesn't get any headlines anymore.
No, and it happens, and it's a real issue because even here on Vancouver Island, I've mentioned this before, we do have followers of Fethullah Gulen here on Vancouver Island, and I've spoken with them, and of course they're always concerned about their family members back in Turkey, and if they do meet, and this is pre-COVID, of course they'll meet in a third country.
Right.
So the family will travel to X country, and the people here will travel, and that's how they try to maintain ties. But they have to be incredibly careful that they're not meeting in a country that has some sort of agreement, whether it's above the surface or below the surface, that could lead to them being grabbed and kidnapped and taken back home. We see that happening. And so this goes on, this is a reality for many Turkish people.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, thanks very much. Look forward to seeing you again.
Right.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.